The $1,000 silk blouse flew across the massive marble kitchen island, landing with a wet, pathetic slap against the cold, polished floor. Are you completely blind? Or is your brain just shrinking along with the rest of you? The voice belonged to Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She hissed the words through perfectly veneered teeth, her manicured finger pointing like a weapon at the damp fabric on the floor. She was dressed in a pristine white tennis skirt and a cashmere sweater, looking every bit the heiress she desperately pretended to be. I have told you 100 times, Eleanor, this is a Stella McCartney. It is strictly dry clean only. And you threw it into the washing machine with your cheap, moth-eaten rags? I stood there in silence, my hands still dripping with warm, soapy water. I carefully wiped them on my faded, fraying cardigan before bending down to pick up the ruined silk. I'm sorry, Chloe. I kept my voice soft. My gaze lowered to the intricate veining of the marble tile. Leo tripped and scraped his knee in the yard. He was crying, and I was rushing to get him a bandage. I just didn't sort the laundry basket properly. Oh, stop using my son as your human shield, she snapped, her designer heels clicking sharply against the tile as she crossed her arms. Her eyes raked over me with absolute disgust, looking at me the way one might look at a cockroach that had scurried into a Michelin star restaurant. Do you have any idea how much that blouse costs? Your entire year of pathetic social security checks couldn't buy the buttons on that shirt. If you can't do a simple load of laundry, why are you even breathing the air in my house? You're a parasite. I didn't argue. I just swallowed the heavy lump in my throat. It wasn't out of fear, but out of a rigid discipline I had mastered over the last 3 years of living in this house. Just then, my son David walked into the kitchen. He was dressed in a crisp, custom-tailored suit, casually sipping a fresh espresso. The rich, bitter smell of the coffee briefly masked the sharp scent of the lavender bleach I had been using all morning. Seeing the tension, his footsteps slowed. A fleeting, desperate spark of hope ignited in my chest. Please, I thought. Just this once, stand up for your mother. But David didn't frown at his wife. He frowned at me. Mom, did you ruin Chloe's clothes again? He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose in sheer exhaustion. His tone wasn't just disappointed, it was embarrassed. Mom, you have to pay attention. Chloe's family is high society. Her wardrobe is designer, not the thrift store junk you're used to. Just apologize to her, please. I don't want to deal with this drama before my morning meeting. My chest tightened, a familiar, icy grip wrapping around my heart. The boy I had carried, birthed and sacrificed my youth for was standing right in front of me, watching his wife degrade me, and demanding that I apologize for the privilege. I understand, I murmured, turning my back to them and placing the ruined shirt in the sink. The warmth in my eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow void. It won't happen again, Chloe scoffed, a smug, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She looped her arm through David's. See? I told you bringing your mother from the trailer park was a mistake. But whatever. My parents are coming over for dinner tonight to celebrate the new company deal. Make sure she actually cooks something edible and stays out of sight. Their footsteps faded down the hallway. I was left alone with the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of the kitchen faucet. I dried my hands and walked silently down the hall to the cramped, windowless room near the garage, a space that used to be a storage closet before Chloe graciously designated it as my bedroom. I locked the door behind me. I didn't cry. I had run out of tears for my son a long time ago. I walked over to the cheap plywood wardrobe, reaching my hand to the very back, feeling for a microscopic groove in the wood paneling. I pressed it. With a soft click, a hidden biometric safe slid open. Inside sat a state-of-the-art encrypted satellite phone and an iPad Pro. I picked up the tablet, allowing the facial recognition software to scan me. The screen illuminated the dim room, displaying a cascade of green and red financial tickers, moving at lightning speed. At the center of the screen, bold white letters read, Vanguard Private Equity Holdings, total assets under management, 12.5 billion, and in the top right corner, my active login profile. Welcome, Chairman Eleanor Vance. Chloe was right about one thing. I didn't have a meager social security check because I didn't need one. 30 years ago, my late husband, a brilliant industrialist, passed away in a tragic aviation accident. He left me his entire empire. But having grown up in the foster care system, I knew exactly what unearned wealth could do to a person's soul. I liquidated the assets, placed the billions into a blind trust, and founded Vanguard as an anonymous entity. I chose to raise David in a modest middle-class neighborhood, working a normal accounting job. desperately hoping he would learn the value of hard work, humility, and integrity. I failed. The moment David got a taste of the upper crust in college, he became obsessed. When he met Chloe, the spoiled heiress to the Sterling Real Estate Group, he completely abandoned his morals to play the role of the perfect trophy husband. He scrubbed his working-class roots, and eventually, he scrubbed me. So why would a billionaire secretly endure being treated like the help in her own son's house? The answer was playing in the backyard. Through the tiny crack in my bedroom door, I could hear the faint laughter of Leo, my 4-year-old grandson. He had his grandfather's kind, gentle eyes. Chloe didn't love that boy. She viewed him as a prop for her Instagram aesthetic, forcing him into uncomfortable designer suits and ignoring him when the cameras were off. I endured the bleach, the scrubbing, and the daily venom for Leo. I was staying close to make sure they didn't poison his soul the way they had poisoned David's. Suddenly, the encrypted satellite phone vibrated in my palm. It was Mr. Hayes, my senior legal counsel and right-hand man at Vanguard. "Good morning, Madam Chairman." His deep, respectful voice resonated through the speaker. "I have the finalized dossier on the Sterling Real Estate Group on my desk. Their financials are a bloodbath. They've defaulted on 3 major commercial loans, and the banks are preparing to freeze their assets by Monday. They are frantically blowing up our switchboard, begging for an emergency bailout from the mystery investor." A sharp, humorless smile touched my lips. The Sterling Real Estate Group, Chloe's parents, the very people who constantly bragged about their untouchable elite status, were quietly drowning in a sea of debt. "Give them a life vest, Mr. Hayes," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "Draft the preliminary bailout agreements. Let them think the mystery investor is taking the bait, but keep my identity strictly classified." "Understood, ma'am. Shall we prepare the trap? Set the snare. I want them feeling invincible by tonight." I ended the call and locked the devices back into the wall. Tonight, the Sterlings were coming to dinner. I was incredibly eager to see just how well these bankrupt frauds could play their roles. By 7 p.m., the dining room smelled of expensive Cabernet and seared filet mignon. The table was dressed in the imported gold-rimmed porcelain that Chloe strictly reserved for her parents. Still wearing my stained apron, I stood quietly in the shadow of the kitchen archway, clearing empty salad plates while listening to the boastful conversation echoing from the dining table. "I'm telling you, David, the timing couldn't be better," Mr. Sterling boomed, swirling his wineglass. He sounded arrogant, but a trained ear could detect the frantic tremor of relief in his voice. "My assistant just got off the phone with Vanguard Holdings, the biggest private equity firm on Wall Street. Their anonymous chairman has personally reviewed our portfolio and is moving forward with the bailout. Once the ink is dry on Monday morning, the Sterling legacy will be untouchable." Chloe squealed in delight, reaching across the table to clink her glass against David's. "Did you hear that, honey? I told you my parents are on a completely different level. A billionaire angel investor. Not everyone gets to breathe that kind of rarefied air." She intentionally raised her voice, her piercing gaze snapping toward the shadows of the kitchen where I was standing. "Oh, Eleanor!" Chloe barked, snapping her fingers at me like I was a stray dog. "Be useful and bring out the horseradish sauce. You're just hovering there like the Grim Reaper." I kept my face perfectly blank, picking up the small silver gravy boat and walking toward the table. As I set it down near Mr. Sterling, the edge of my sleeve accidentally brushed against his water goblet. "Watch your filthy hands!" Mr. Sterling snapped, violently pulling his glass away as if I had infected it with the plague. He aggressively wiped the rim with his silk napkin, shooting a glare at my son. "David, I don't mean to tell you how to run your household, but you really need to put a leash on your staff, or your mother, whatever she is. Don't let the lower classes ruin the ambiance when we are discussing high-level finance." David's face flushed bright red. He didn't look at me. He looked at his father-in-law, nodding furiously. "I'm so sorry, Richard. You're completely right, Mom. Just go back to your room. We don't need you out here anymore." "Hold on a second," Chloe sneered, a cruel, mocking light dancing in her eyes as she stopped me from turning away. "Eleanor, did you even comprehend a single word we were saying about Vanguard and the multi-million-dollar buyout? Oh, who am I kidding? You've probably never held a check larger than $1,000 in your miserable life. Even if I drew it in crayon, you wouldn't understand how power actually works. Go back to your little closet and watch your soap operas." The table erupted into condescending laughter. I stood perfectly straight. I looked at the three of them, lawing, arrogant, entirely oblivious to the cliff they were dancing on. Then I looked at David. He was swirling his wine, forcing a chuckle, completely selling his soul for a seat at a table that was built on rotting wood. The last fragile thread of a mother's unconditional patience snapped. There was no anger left, only absolute, terrifying clarity. "You're right," I smiled. It was a soft, harmless, and thoroughly defeated smile. "I don't understand it all. Have a wonderful evening." I turned and walked back down the hallway. With every step I took toward my dark, cramped room, my posture straightened. They were currently raising their glasses, toasting to their mysterious savior. They had no idea that the old, penniless woman they had just humiliated and banished to the shadows was the very architect of their impending destruction. The next morning, the house smelled of lavender bleach and blind arrogance. I was on my hands and knees in the master bathroom, wearing yellow rubber gloves, scrubbing the grout of Chloe's oversized jacuzzi tub. It was a demeaning task, one she specifically assigned to me after firing the weekly cleaning service to save money, a financial crisis she blamed on inflation, though I knew the real reason was her father's freezing credit lines. Tucked safely in the pocket of my oversized apron was my encrypted earpiece. "They took the bait, Madam Chairman." Mr. Hayes's voice hummed smoothly in my ear, contrasting sharply with the harsh scraping of my scrub brush against the porcelain. "Richard Sterling called my office 4 times before 9 a.m. He's practically hyperventilating. He agreed to the preliminary terms without even negotiating the interest rates." I paused my scrubbing, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. "He didn't bring his own legal team to review the clauses? He can't afford one." Hayes chuckled, a dry, corporate sound. "And even if he could, his desperation is blinding him. He thinks Vanguard is his golden goose. He is ready to sign over 85% of the company's debt consolidation rights to us just to get the cash injection by next Monday." "Excellent," I murmured, staring at my distorted reflection in the polished chrome faucet. "Draft the final agreements. Bury the liquidation trigger clause on page 42. Make it look standard, but ensure that the moment they default on a single micropayment, Vanguard has the right to seize all personal and corporate assets. I want their mansions, their cars, down to the designer watches on their wrists. Consider it done. Shall I schedule the signing?" Before I could answer, the heavy oak door of the bathroom swung open. I instantly tapped my ear, disconnecting the call, and plunged my scrub brush back into the soapy water. Chloe strutted into the bathroom, carrying a towering stack of glossy shopping bags from Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue. She dropped them onto the plush bath mat, the bags spilling open to reveal silk garments and velvet jewelry boxes. "Eleanor, you missed a spot," she sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured acrylic nail at a microscopic speck of dust near the drain. "Honestly, if I wanted a half-hearted job, I would have hired a teenager. Put your back into it." I kept my head down, scrubbing the imaginary spot. "Yes, Chloe, I'm sorry." "You should be," she sighed dramatically, leaning against the marble vanity to admire herself in the mirror. She picked up a heavy diamond-encrusted tennis bracelet from one of the boxes and clasped it around her wrist. It sparkled violently under the vanity lights. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she gloated, holding her wrist out. $15,000. But, of course, that's just pocket change now. My father just closed a massive deal with Vanguard Holdings this morning. We are officially backed by a billionaire. The sheer audacity of her delusion almost made me laugh out loud. I kept my face entirely neutral, dipping my brush back into the bucket. "That sounds very fortunate for your family, Chloe." "Fortunate? Please, it's expected," she scoffed, examining her reflection. "People like my parents attract elite investors. Vanguard knows a legacy empire when they see one. We're hosting a massive celebration this weekend. It's going to double as Leo's 5th birthday party, but mostly, it's a networking gala for my father's new elite circle. We're inviting everyone who's anyone in the tri-state area." She suddenly turned to me, her expression hardening into a look of absolute disdain. "Which brings me to you." She kicked the side of my soapy bucket with the tip of her designer flat. "I've hired a Michelin-starred catering company for the party. There will be photographers, socialites, and potentially a representative from Vanguard. Under no circumstances are you to be seen." I stopped scrubbing and looked up at her. "It's Leo's birthday. I just wanted to give him his present." "You can slide your little handmade wooden garbage under his door the next morning," she snapped, her voice turning venomous. I am not having you wander around my pristine house, wearing your mothball-scented sweaters, embarrassing me in front of the Vanguard rep. You will stay in the kitchen, you will help the caterers wash the dishes, and if anyone asks, you are the temporary hired help. Do you understand me? My jaw tightened. The disrespect was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I thought of the Vanguard liquidation contract, currently sitting on Mr. Hayes's desk, waiting for my signature. I thought of the $15,000 bracelet on her wrist that I essentially owned. I understand, I said softly. Good. Don't make me tell David to handle you, she threatened, turning on her heel and strutting out of the bathroom. Later that evening, the reality of my son's complicity shattered whatever remaining illusions I held on to. I was in the kitchen, quietly chopping vegetables for their dinner, when David walked in. He looked stressed, his tie loosened, holding his desk of credit card bills. David, I said gently, wiping my hands on a towel. Chloe mentioned a large party this weekend. She asked me to pretend to be the maid. I looked into his eyes, desperately searching for the little boy who used to make me macaroni necklaces. The boy who promised he would buy me a mansion when he grew up so I would never have to work hard again. David wouldn't meet my gaze. He shuffled the bills in his hand, looking everywhere but at my face. Mom, please don't start, he groaned, running a hand through his hair. Chloe is under a lot of pressure right now. Her parents' company just got this massive lifeline from Vanguard, and they need to project a certain image. You know how you get. You're just not used to high society etiquette. I am your mother, David, I whispered, my voice trembling, not with sadness but with a brewing volcanic rage. I raised you, I paid for your college, and you are going to let your wife hide me in the kitchen like a dirty secret at your own son's birthday party. Stop being so dramatic, he suddenly snapped, slamming the bills onto the granite counter. It's just one night. God, Mom. Why do you always have to make everything about you? Chloe's family is finally stepping into the big leagues. Vanguard might send an executive to the party. If they see you, bumbling around, looking like a peasant, it makes me look bad. It makes us look bad. He let out a heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. Just do what she asks. Keep your head down, stay in the kitchen, and don't ruin this for us. Is that really so hard? He turned and walked away without waiting for an answer, retreating into his comfortable, oblivious bubble. I stood alone in the kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears. It makes us look bad. Those words echoed in my mind, cold and final. I picked up the kitchen knife and resumed chopping the carrots. My movements slow, precise, and entirely devoid of emotion. For 3 years, I had held back. I had hidden my empire, hoping that somewhere beneath the designer suits and the least luxury cars, my son's moral compass was still intact. I had endured the insults, the degrading chores, and the isolation, all in a desperate bid to keep my family together for Leo's sake. But David had made his choice. He had chosen the illusion of grandeur over the mother who gave him life. He had chosen the parasitic rot of the Sterling family over basic human decency. They wanted a show for the Vanguard executives. They wanted a flawless, high society gala to celebrate their newfound power. They wanted to lock the poor, pathetic mother-in-law in the shadows so she wouldn't ruin their perfect aesthetic. Very well, I thought, a razor-sharp smile finally gracing my lips as I looked out the window into the pitch-black night. I will give you exactly what you want, Chloe. I will stay in the shadows, right up until the moment I burn your entire world to the ground. That night, long after David and Chloe had gone upstairs, I found Leo sitting on the cold kitchen floor in his dinosaur pajamas. He had dragged his blanket behind him like a cape. In one hand he held a plastic astronaut with a missing arm. In the other, he clutched the corner of a drawing he had made at preschool. "Grandma," he whispered, "are you mad at Daddy?" Children always ask the question adults work hardest to avoid. I lowered myself beside him, my knees protesting against the tile. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you. That's not what I asked." The words were so simple that they cut straight through me. I looked toward the hallway. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the wine refrigerator and the distant sound of Chloe laughing at something on television. I could have lied. I had lied before, small, protective lies meant to keep a child from carrying burdens that belong to grown people. Instead, I touched the paper in his hand. "What did you draw?" He unfolded it carefully. 4 figures stood beneath a crooked yellow sun. Leo was in the middle. I was on one side, drawn in a blue sweater. David stood on the other. Chloe was farther away, wearing a giant green dress. There was no house, no car, no swimming pool, no expensive toys. Just 4 people holding hands. Teacher said draw your family, he explained. Mommy said it looks messy. It looks honest. He studied me with those patient gray eyes he had inherited from his grandfather. Will you come to my birthday? The question tightened something deep inside my chest. I'll be here. At the table? I hesitated for half a second too long. Leo looked down. Mommy said important people are coming. She said you make people uncomfortable. A 5-year-old should not know how to repeat cruelty with perfect accuracy. He should not have been learning that love could be ranked by clothing, income, or usefulness. I took his small hand between both of mine. Listen to me. People who make others feel small are usually trying to hide how small they feel inside. You never have to become cruel to prove you matter. He nodded solemnly, though I knew he could not yet understand the full meaning. Then he leaned against my shoulder. I like when you're here. That was the sentence that nearly broke me. For 3 years I had told myself I remained in that house for Leo, but sitting on the kitchen floor, I finally admitted a harder truth. Staying was no longer enough. Watching cruelty happen, and quietly cleaning up after it was not the same as protecting him. I could not teach him dignity while allowing him to see mine trampled every day. I tucked the blanket around his shoulders and carried him upstairs. At the landing, I paused outside David's study. Through the partly open door, I saw my son sitting alone at his desk staring at an old photograph. It was a picture of the 2 of us at his college graduation. I wore a department store dress. He wore a rented cap and gown. We were both laughing. For one breath, hope rose again, then Chloe entered behind him. What are you looking at? She asked. David quickly turned the photograph face down. Nothing. That single word told me everything. He still remembered who he had been. He was simply too ashamed to let that person live. I carried Leo to bed and kissed his forehead. When I returned to my room, I opened the hidden safe and reviewed the Sterling dossier again. This time, I did not study only the loans and shell companies. I opened the private reports on David, the expenses he had authorized, the signatures he had placed on misleading investor statements, the quiet decisions he had made to keep Chloe's family pleased. He was not merely standing aside corruption. He had begun participating in it. I closed the file, and for the first time, I allowed myself to consider a future in which saving Leo might require losing David completely. The evening of Leo's 5th birthday party arrived, draping the mansion in a suffocating layer of pretension. Inside my small room, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, carefully wrapping a small, hand-carved wooden horse in simple brown paper. My late husband had carved it for David when he was a little boy. It was sanded smooth by time and love, a priceless heirloom in my eyes, and the only genuine thing in this house full of plastic and price tags. I stood up and smoothed out the skirt of my dress. It was a dark navy silk, modest, vintage, and meticulously ironed. It wasn't dripping in designer logos, but it was the best thing I owned in my Eleanor wardrobe. The door violently swung open without a knock. Chloe stood in the doorway, breathtaking in a glittering backless emerald gown. But the ugliness on her face ruined the aesthetic entirely. She looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling as if she had just stepped in something foul. You are not seriously wearing that dusty old rag, are you? She scoffed, crossing her arms. You look like you're heading to a funeral in 1995. I told you. My parents' elite network is going to be here tonight. CEOs, hedge fund managers, potential Vanguard scouts. I cannot have you wandering around looking like a charity case. I held the small wrapped box tightly to my chest. It's my grandson's birthday. Chloe, I just want to give him his present and have a slice of cake. I won't get in your way. You're already in my way, she snapped, stepping closer. If you insist on being seen, you will stand by the catering staff. Do not speak to my guests. Do not offer your unsolicited small-town opinions. Just blend into the wallpaper. She spun on her heel and slammed the door. Before the first guests arrived, Leo slipped into the kitchen and wrapped both arms around my waist. He had escaped from the photographer, one shoe untied and his tiny bow tie hanging crooked beneath his chin. Grandma, hide me, he whispered. I crouched in front of him. From what? Pictures. From the ballroom came Chloe's sharp voice. Leo, stand next to the cake. We need the family shot before the icing starts to sweat. His shoulders rose toward his ears. I reeded his shoe and straightened the bow tie, but I left it slightly loose so he could breathe. You only have to smile when you feel like smiling. Mommy says smiles are part of being polite. Sometimes. But being polite does not mean pretending you are happy when you are frightened. He looked toward the doorway. Are the important people here? Some people who believe they're important. That made him grin. I reached into my apron pocket and handed him a small brass button. It had fallen from his grandfather's old work coat decades ago. I had polished it until the engraved letter V caught the light. When the room feels too loud, I told him, hold this and remember that you belong to people who loved you before anyone cared what you wore. He closed his fist around it. Chloe appeared in the archway moments later, fury flashing behind her practiced smile. There you are. What did I say about wandering into the service area? He needed his shoe tied, I said. He has people for that. I am people. Her smile hardened. Not tonight. She took Leo by the wrist, not violently enough for a stranger to object, but firmly enough that he winced, and pulled him toward the foyer. I watched them go, my hand curling around the edge of the counter. A few minutes later, Mr. Hayes called through my earpiece. The Sterlings have submitted the last of the supporting documents, he said. There's something else you should know. David signed the personal guarantee as a secondary obligor. I went still. When? Yesterday afternoon. That meant David had legally tied himself to Sterling debt. He had done it after our conversation in the kitchen. After I reminded him who I was to him. After he told me not to embarrass them. Did he understand the exposure? I asked. He initialed every page. Whether he read them is another matter. I looked through the archway. David stood near the staircase, laughing with a group of executives. Chloe adjusted his pocket square, and he bent to kiss her temple. He looked polished, confident, almost regal. But I knew him. Whenever he was afraid, he rubbed his thumb against the side of his index finger. He was doing it now. Madam Chairman, Hayes prompted. Keep the guarantee in place, I said. There was a pause. Hayes knew me well enough to understand what that decision cost. Understood. I ended the call and returned to arranging hors d'oeuvre. For the next hour, I watched David perform. He praised Richard Sterling's genius. He told investors the family company was stronger than ever. He repeated claims he knew were false, smiling while men with retirement funds and small partnerships listened with relief. That was the moment my grief changed shape. Until then, I had believed David's weakness was personal. A son too cowardly to defend his mother. Now I saw the wider damage. His hunger to belong had made him dangerous. He was willing to help deceive other people so long as the deception purchased him a seat at the table. The party was no longer merely a test of whether he loved me. It was evidence of what he had become. By 8 p.m., the house was a chaotic symphony of wealth. A live string quartet played softly in the foyer. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage champagne. The hypocrisy was nauseating. This extravagant party was being funded by maxed-out credit cards, all banking on the delusion of my Vanguard bailout. I stood near the kitchen archway, keeping a low profile as instructed. The front doors opened, and Mr. and Mrs. Sterling made their grand entrance. They walked with their noses held high, waving at the local socialites. But from my vantage point, I could see the nervous sweat on Mr. Sterling's brow. I could read the frantic whispering between him and his wife. Did Hayes call back? Did Vanguard confirm the wire transfer? Mrs. Sterling muttered through a fake plastered smile. Not yet, but they approved the preliminary. Keep smiling. If anyone smells blood in the water, we're finished. He hissed back. As Mr. Sterling walked past the coat check, he spotted me standing near the hallway. He didn't even pause his conversation. He simply unbuttoned his heavy, cashmere overcoat and shoved it blindly into my chest, nearly knocking me off balance. Hang this up in the climate-controlled closet, Eleanor. And use a padded hanger, he ordered without looking at me. That coat is worth more than your entire pension. I held the heavy fabric, the irony so thick it was almost suffocating. He was handing his coat to the help, completely unaware that he was treating the very billionaire he was praying to like a coat rack. Right away, Mr. Sterling, I said evenly. An hour later, it was time for presents. The guests gathered in the grand living room. A mountain of extravagant, soulless gifts sat in the center. A miniature drivable Tesla, Gucci toddler loafers, and massive Lego sets that Leo would never be allowed to touch because they would ruin the living room's aesthetic. When the crowd parted slightly, I stepped forward. I knelt down in front of Leo, who looked exhausted in his stiff little tuxedo. I handed him the brown paper package. Happy birthday, my sweet boy. I smiled warmly. Leo tore the paper open. When he saw the little wooden horse, his eyes lit up. It was simple. It was meant to be played with. He immediately hugged it to his chest and made a happy little galloping noise. Suddenly, a manicured hand snatched the horse right out of his grip. Leo's face fell. He looked up, tears instantly brimming in his eyes. Chloe stood there, holding the wooden toy by the tail as if it were a dead rat. She let out a high-pitched, condescending laugh for the crowd. "Oh, my mother-in-law is so wonderfully eccentric," she announced loudly, making sure the VIP guests heard her. "She loves picking up wooden scraps from flea markets. But, honestly, Eleanor, you can't give a child something covered in mysterious germs and splinters." With a casual flick of her wrist, she tossed the heirloom, the horse my husband spent hours carving, straight into a nearby trash can. The crowd chuckled politely at her protective mother routine. My heart violently stopped. I didn't care about the humiliation from the crowd. But, looking at Leo's face, his bottom lip quivering as his mother forced a shiny $500 iPad into his hands to replace the toy he actually wanted, a chilling realization washed over me. My presence here wasn't protecting Leo. This toxic environment was going to crush his gentle spirit anyway, molding him into another vapid, cruel replica of his parents. "All right, everyone. Dinner is served in the main dining hall." Chloe chimed, clapping her hands. The guests began migrating toward the massive custom-built mahogany table. It was set perfectly with 12 silver chargers, crystal glassware, and towering floral centerpieces. I waited until the guests were seated, intending to slide into the small, empty chair at the very end of the table near the kitchen door. As my hand touched the back of the chair, Chloe's voice cut through the room like a bullwhip. "Excuse me, Eleanor. What do you think you're doing?" The entire dining room fell dead silent. 12 pairs of elite, judgmental eyes turned to stare at me. "I was just sitting down for dinner," I replied, my voice steady but quiet. Chloe let out a theatrical sigh, shaking her head. "Eleanor, I told you this table is strictly set for 12. It's for family and VIP partners only. There is absolutely no room for you here." She pointed a long, glittering finger toward the sliding glass doors that led to the backyard. Outside, in the chilling autumn night, the patio lights were off. I had Maria set up a plastic folding table on the back patio for the catering staff, Chloe announced, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "You can go eat out there with the maids. There's a plate of leftover salad and some bread ends in the kitchen. You wouldn't know which fork to use for the caviar anyway. We wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself." A few of the guests snickered behind their napkins. Mr. Sterling smirked, taking a sip of his wine. I didn't look at them. I turned my eyes to the head of the table, to David, my son. The boy I had sacrificed everything for. David's face was beet red. He looked at the floor, then at his wife, and finally at me. This was the moment, the final test. If he stood up, if he pulled up a chair for his mother and demanded respect, I would forgive everything. I would sign the Vanguard deal. I would save them all. David cleared his throat. He stood up and walked toward me. He reached out and gently gripped my elbow, not to defend me, to steer me toward the back door. "Mom," he whispered through gritted teeth, his grip tight. "Just go outside, please. Don't make a scene. My father-in-law is stressed enough. Go eat on the patio. I'll buy you a nice lunch tomorrow to make up for it." He let go of my arm, turned his back on me, and returned to his seat, picking up his wine glass to join a toast with his father-in-law. Something inside of me died in that exact second. The warm, forgiving, endlessly patient mother ceased to exist. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't scream. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked out the sliding glass doors into the biting cold of the patio. Behind me, the glass doors slid shut, sealing away the warmth, the laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. I stood alone in the dark. In front of me was a flimsy plastic table. On it sat a paper plate with a few wilted pieces of lettuce, and the crusts of bread Chloe had discarded. I looked through the glass. Chloe was throwing her head back in laughter. David was kissing her cheek. They looked like royalty celebrating a victory. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, my fingers wrapped around the cold, heavy metal of the encrypted satellite phone. I sat down on the cheap plastic folding chair. I didn't touch the scraps on the paper plate. Instead, I dialed a direct, secure line. It rang exactly once before being answered. "Madam Chairman," Mr. Hayes's voice came through, crisp and professional. "I have the Sterling bailout contracts finalized. They are eagerly awaiting your signature first thing Monday morning." I stared through the glass, locking eyes with Chloe for a fraction of a second. She smirked at me through the window and raised her wine glass in a mocking toast to my humiliation. A slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. "Tear them up, Hayes," I said softly. My voice colder than the autumn wind. There was a brief pause on the line. "Ma'am, the preliminary agreements, cancel the bailout," I ordered, my tone absolute and unyielding. "Withdraw every cent of Vanguard's backing." "And Mr. Hayes?" "Yes, Madam Chairman?" "Call their creditors, call the banks. Execute the penalty clauses on their existing debt. By 8 a.m. on Monday, I want their accounts frozen. I want the foreclosure notices nailed to their front doors. I want them to lose the company, the cars, and the roof over their heads." I watched my son pour another glass of $800 wine for his father-in-law. I want them to have absolutely nothing. Monday morning hit the Sterling household, not with the gentle rays of the sun, but with the violent shrill ringing of telephones. It was 8:05 a.m. I was in the kitchen, quietly sweeping up the leftover confetti from Saturday's party, wearing my usual faded cardigan. Suddenly the front doors were thrown open with such force that they crashed against the walls. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling burst into the foyer. The polished, arrogant elite from Saturday night were completely gone. Mr. Sterling's tie was undone, his hair was a wild sweaty mess, and his face was the color of wet ash. David and Chloe rushed down the sweeping staircase, clutching their bathrobes. "Dad, what's going on?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill. "Why are you here so early? Did the Vanguard wire clear?" "They pulled out," Mr. Sterling roared, his voice cracking in pure terror. He slammed his briefcase onto the marble floor. "The Vanguard deal is dead. Not only did they cancel the bailout, but they triggered the penalty clauses. The banks were waiting for the 8 a.m. bell. They froze our corporate accounts. They froze my personal accounts. The stock is crashing as we speak." Chloe stumbled backward, gripping the banister as if she had been shot. No, that's impossible. They approved the preliminary. We celebrated." "Does it look like we're celebrating now, Chloe?" Her father screamed, practically pulling his own hair out. "My credit cards just got declined for a cup of coffee. The bank is sending a foreclosure notice for this very house by this afternoon." Absolute chaos erupted. Mrs. Sterling began hyperventilating on the stairs. David was pale, frantically scrolling through his phone, watching his own bank accounts flash red with funds unicavable errors. In the midst of their world ending, Chloe's wild, panicked eyes darted to the kitchen. She saw me standing there, quietly holding a broom. Her fear instantly mutated into toxic, displaced rage. She stormed toward me, kicking the dustpan out of my hand. It clattered loudly across the tiles. "What are you looking at?" she shrieked, her face contorted in ugly fury. "This is your fault. You are a curse. Ever since you dragged your pathetic, poverty-stricken aura into this house, everything has gone wrong. Pack your garbage bags and get out of my sight. I don't want you in my house anymore." I looked at the broom on the floor. Then, I looked at her. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't apologize. I didn't look down. I simply reached behind my neck, untied the strings of my maid's apron, and let it fall to the floor. "You're right, Chloe," I said, my voice shockingly calm amidst their screaming. "It's time for me to go." I turned and walked out the front door, leaving my few cheap belongings in that tiny closet. I didn't need them anyway. A sleek, black Maybach with tinted windows was already waiting for me at the end of the block. The ride downtown took less than 30 minutes, but it felt like crossing between two lives. In the back seat of the Maybach, I removed the cheap cardigan and folded it carefully beside me. Beneath it, I wore a simple black blouse. Mr. Hayes had arranged for my suit, shoes, and security team to be waiting at Vanguard. As the city passed outside the tinted windows, I thought I would feel triumphant. I felt only tired. Power is clean in theory. On paper, decisions are columns, signatures, rights, and obligations. But every line in the Sterling liquidation documents now had a face attached to it. Richard's panic, Chloe's rage, David's pleading, Leo's confusion. I had no intention of reversing course. The Sterlings had defrauded lenders, employees, and investors. Their collapse was not something I had invented. I had simply stopped preventing it. Still, justice and satisfaction were not the same thing. My phone lit up with an incoming secure message from Hayes. "Sterling, Pedro account contents, 214 employees at risk of missing Friedrich Pedro." I immediately called him. "The employees get paid," I said before he could speak. "Of course. I've already prepared a protected operating facility. Fund it through Vanguard. Separate worker wages, health benefits, and active tenant services from the family's personal liabilities. No receptionist, groundskeeper, leasing agent, or maintenance technician loses a paycheck because the Sterlings treated the company like a private wallet. And the existing properties, keep them operating. Appoint an independent management team. Freeze executive bonuses. Review every pending eviction and every unsafe maintenance complaint they ignored. Hayes was quiet for a moment. That will complicate the acquisition. Then let it be complicated. This was the difference between ruin and responsibility. I did not want innocent people buried beneath the family I was bringing down. Another message arrived. This one from the private investigator assigned to Leo. Child remans at residence with nanny. Parents depart for Vanguard. Child appears safe. My shoulders loosened slightly. Hayes, have family counsel file for temporary protective supervision today. Not full emergency removal unless the court agrees there is immediate risk. We do this correctly. Yes, Madam Chairman. And no press leaks. Richard Sterling has already contacted 2 reporters, claiming Vanguard ambushed him. Let him talk. We answer with audited numbers. When I ended the call, the car stopped beneath the private entrance of Vanguard Tower. 2 women from my executive staff waited inside. One carried a garment bag. The other held a leather portfolio and a cup of tea prepared exactly as I liked it. Neither stared at my worn shoes. Neither asked why their chairman had arrived dressed like a housekeeper. They simply greeted me with the respect they had shown for 20 years. In the private dressing suite, I changed slowly. The navy suit fit, as if it had been built around my posture. The diamond brooch had belonged to my husband. I pinned it to my lapel, then looked at myself in the mirror. I did not see a transformed woman. I saw the same woman the Sterlings had mocked. The same hands, the same face, the same history. Clothing had not created my authority. Their blindness had merely prevented them from recognizing it. Before entering the boardroom, I asked Hayes one final question. Did David call? 17 times. To apologize? Hayes met my eyes. Every voicemail asks you to save the deal. None asks whether you are safe. That answer settled the last uncertainty in me. Open the doors. At 11 a.m., the Vanguard Holdings skyscraper in downtown Manhattan felt like a fortress of glass, steel, and untouchable wealth. Inside the elite 60th floor boardroom, the air was thick with the stench of desperation. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, Chloe and David sat huddled together on one side of a massive, custom-built mahogany conference table. They looked microscopic in the sprawling, opulent room. They were shaking. Mr. Sterling was muttering his pitch under his breath, desperately trying to figure out how to beg the mysterious billionaire for a second chance. Chloe was biting her expensive acrylic nails, her designer makeup slightly smudged. The heavy boardroom door opened. Mr. Hayes, my lead attorney, walked in. He wore a sharp Tom Ford suit and an expression of absolute, freezing indifference. He dropped a thick stack of legal documents onto the table. The chairman will be with you momentarily, Hayes said crisply. You have exactly 5 minutes of her time. I suggest you do not waste it. David swallowed hard, nervously fixing his tie. Please, Mr. Hayes, just tell us what went wrong. We can fix it. My father-in-law is willing to offer whatever it takes. Before Hayes could answer, the rhythmic commanding click, clack of expensive heels echoed from the marble hallway outside. The double doors swung wide open, flanked by 2 towering private security guards. The room went dead silent. I stepped into the boardroom. The faded cardigans and the mothball scent were gone. I was wearing a bespoke, navy blue power suit cut to absolute perfection. My hair was professionally styled, and pinned to my lapel was a flawless, 3-carat diamond brooch that caught the sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I emanated power, wealth, and absolute ruin. Chloe was the first to react. Her brain completely misfired, unable to process the reality in front of her. She let out a bizarre, hysterical laugh, standing up and pointing an accusing finger at me. "What the hell are you doing here?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "Did you follow us? Are you insane? Security, why did you let this crazy old woman in here? Get her out before the chairman sees this." She expected the guards to grab me. She expected Hayes to panic. Instead, Mr. Hayes stepped forward, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. He slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Ms. Sterling, you will shut your mouth and show some respect," Hayes commanded, his voice dripping with venom. "Allow me to introduce you to the founder and chairman of Vanguard Holdings. The woman who currently owns 90% of your family's debt, Chairman Eleanor Vance." If a bomb had gone off in the room, it would have been less destructive. The color instantly drained from Chloe's face, leaving her looking like a porcelain corpse. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Mr. Sterling let out a strangled gasp, literally sliding off his leather chair and falling onto his knees on the carpet, clutching his chest as if he were having a heart attack. David? My son David stared at me with wide, horrified eyes. The blood had left his face. He looked at the diamond brooch, the security detail, the billionaire empire, and then at the face of the mother he had banished to a plastic table just 2 nights ago. Mom? David whispered, his voice trembling so violently it cracked. Mom, is this a joke? I didn't answer him, I didn't even look at him. I walked slowly to the head of the table, the seat of absolute power. I sat down, crossing my legs. Resting my hands perfectly on the polished wood, I looked directly into Chloe's terrified, hyperventilating eyes. You were right on Saturday, Chloe, I began, my voice soft, calm, and utterly terrifying. Your dining table was only set for 12. There was absolutely no room for me. I didn't belong there. I leaned forward slightly, the diamond on my lapel flashing. But at this table, I am the one who decides who gets a seat and who gets thrown out into the cold. Eleanor. Madam Chairman, please, Mr. Sterling begged, still on the floor, crawling forward and grabbing the edge of the table. Tears were streaming down his wrinkled face. It was a misunderstanding, we didn't know. If we had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you would have kissed my feet while stabbing me in the back. I cut him off smoothly. I nodded to Hayes. Hayes slid the thick stack of documents across the table until it hit Mr. Sterling's trembling hands. This is not a bailout agreement, I stated clearly. This is a liquidation contract. Vanguard is absorbing the Sterling Real Estate Group in its entirety to cover your defaults. I am buying your life's work, your legacy, and your name, for exactly $1. Mrs. Sterling burst into loud, ugly sobs, burying her face in her hands. Chloe suddenly threw herself across the table, knocking over a glass of water. Her arrogance was completely eradicated, replaced by pathetic, groveling desperation. Mom, please, Chloe sobbed, reaching for my hand. I pulled my hand away in disgust. I'm so sorry. I was stressed. I was horrible. But we are family. Think of Leo. You can't put your own grandson out on the street. Hearing Leo's name from her lips sent a spike of cold fury through my veins. I opened a sleek black folder in front of me and tossed a stack of glossy photographs across the table. They were private investigator photos. Photos of Chloe leaving Leo with random teenagers while she went to luxury spas. Photos of her screaming at the toddler for ruining her makeup. Photos of her entering a hotel with a man who was very obviously not my son. Do not ever use my grandson as a shield again, I hissed, leaning in so close she flinched. You don't care about Leo. He is an accessory to you, and my lawyers have already drafted the emergency custody filings. By the time this week is over, you will not have a company, a house, or a child. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by Chloe's gasping sobs. Then David stood up. He walked around the table, tears streaming down his face. He fell to his knees beside my chair. Mom, he wept, trying to grab my skirt. Mom, it's me, your son. I'm so sorry I didn't defend you. I was blind, I was stupid. But please, don't do this to me. I'm your boy. I'll divorce her today. I'll come live with you. Just save me, Mom. Please. I looked down at the top of his head. For a fraction of a second, I remembered the little boy who used to hold my hand on the walk to school. But then, the image of the freezing patio and the paper plate of scraps overlaid it. I stood up, stepping away from his grasping hands. My son, I said, my voice echoing with hollow finality, died on a freezing patio 2 nights ago while you drank $800 wine and laughed at his corpse. David looked up at me, his face utterly destroyed. I am not your mother anymore, David, I said, looking down at the 4 ruined lives in front of me. I am just your creditor, and I am collecting my debts. I picked up a solid gold Mont Blanc pen and signed my name with a sharp, elegant flourish on the liquidation order. I dropped the pen onto the documents. Mr. Hayes, I said, turning my back on them and walking toward the doors. Have the sheriffs at the Sterling Mansion by 4 p.m. I want them out on the curb before sunset. If they try to take anything other than the clothes on their backs, have them arrested for stealing Vanguard property. As the heavy boardroom doors closed behind me, the agonizing wails of my former family echoed through the glass. A symphony of karma that had been 3 long years in the making. The sunset over the Sterling Mansion that Monday afternoon was breathtakingly beautiful, casting a warm, golden glow over a scene of absolute devastation. Exactly at 4 p.m., a fleet of county sheriff cruisers and moving trucks pulled up the grand circular driveway. The neighborhood, the same elite socialites who had sipped vintage champagne in that very house just 2 nights prior, now stood on their manicured lawns, watching the spectacle with greedy, whispering fascination. Inside, the illusion was being violently dismantled. Foreclosure notices were slapped onto the custom mahogany doors. Repo men in heavy boots marched through the foyer, carrying out flat-screen TVs, antique vases, and pieces of custom furniture. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling walked out the front door, each carrying a single, cheap canvas duffel bag, the only luggage they were legally allowed to take. They looked like ghosts. Mr. Sterling kept his head bowed, unable to make eye contact with his golfing buddies across the street. Mrs. Sterling was weeping uncontrollably into a crumpled tissue, her socialite status completely eradicated. But the loudest sound came from the master bedroom balcony. "You can't take those. Those are Birkins. They're vintage." Chloe's hysterical shrieks pierced the quiet neighborhood. She was dragged out the front doors by two female deputies, her hair a tangled bird's nest, her expensive makeup streaked down her face in dark, ugly rivers. A repo man walked out behind her, carrying a massive plastic bin filled to the brim with her designer handbags, jewelry boxes, and silk dresses. "That's my property," Chloe screamed, thrashing against the deputies. "My husband bought those for me." "Actually, ma'am," the bank representative said dryly, checking his clipboard, "they were purchased using corporate credit lines from Vanguard Holdings. They belong to the chairman now." Chloe collapsed onto the meticulously manicured grass. The woman who had sneered at my cheap rags and banished me to the freezing patio was now sitting in the dirt, wailing like a spoiled toddler as her entire identity was loaded into the back of a repossession truck. David stood near the sidewalk, watching his life dissolve. He held a small cardboard box of his belongings. He looked hollowed out. He pulled out his cell phone, his hand shaking, and dialed my number one last time. Somewhere, miles away in a secure Vanguard office, a burner phone was tossed into a trash can, ringing out into the void. The 3 weeks before the custody hearing were harder than the boardroom. Public humiliation had been simple. Legal protection was not. Leo spent the first 2 nights with a court-approved temporary guardian while investigators interviewed the household staff. I was allowed supervised visits, even though he cried each time I left. The court had to determine whether I was seeking custody to protect him or to punish his parents. It was a fair question. I asked it of myself every night. At Vanguard, I could make decisions worth hundreds of millions before breakfast. In family court, I had to wait in beige hallways while strangers evaluated whether I knew a child's bedtime routine, so I learned everything I should have already known. Leo hated peas but loved green beans. He needed the hallway light left on. He woke from nightmares whenever adults shouted behind closed doors. He could not pronounce the word squirrel, and he laughed every time he tried. He wanted strawberry toothpaste, not mint. He carried the brass button I gave him in the pocket of every pair of pants. During one supervised visit, we sat at a small table in the Child Services Center, building a wooden train track. "Are Mommy and Daddy poor now?" he asked. I placed another piece of track between us. "They have less money than before." "Is that because they were mean to you?" The caseworker looked up from her notes. I chose my words carefully. Grown-ups sometimes lose things because of choices they make. But being mean and being poor are not the same. There are kind people with very little money, and cruel people with more than they can ever spend. He pushed the train around the curve. "Did you take our house?" "The company took the house because money was owed." "Did you tell the company?" I could have hidden behind language. Instead, I nodded. "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. "Are you mean?" The question hurt more than anything Chloe had ever said to me. "I have done things that made people suffer," I answered. "Some of those things were necessary. Some may have been angrier than they needed to be. I will always tell you the truth about that." Leo studied my face, then placed the wooden train in my hand. "You can be the conductor." It was not forgiveness. Children should never be asked to forgive adults for consequences they do not understand. It was trust offered in the smallest possible amount. I accepted it carefully. Meanwhile, David's attorneys tried to portray me as a manipulative billionaire who had infiltrated the household to manufacture evidence. Chloe's team claimed the photographs of her affair were irrelevant, and the recordings lacked context. Richard Sterling gave interviews describing me as vindictive and unstable. So I refused every television request. Hayes wanted a public statement. I authorized only one sentence: Vanguard will protect employees, residents, creditors, and the welfare of the minor child while the courts review the evidence. No insults, no celebration, no photographs of Chloe being removed from the mansion. The spectacle had already gone far enough. Privately, however, the evidence kept growing. The former nanny testified that Chloe regularly left Leo overnight without notice. A preschool teacher documented his anxiety around raised voices. A pediatrician confirmed missed appointments. Most painful of all, David admitted under oath that he had seen the behavior and did not want conflict at home. That sentence ended any remaining argument inside me. He had not been unaware. He had been absent while standing in the room. The final battle didn't take place in a boardroom, but in family court, exactly 3 weeks later. If the eviction was a spectacle, the custody hearing was an execution. Chloe and David sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. The stress of bankruptcy had turned them into bitter, toxic enemies. They sat as far apart from each other as physically possible, whispering vicious insults back and forth. David blamed Chloe's arrogance. Chloe blamed David's spinelessness. They had nothing left but their resentment. They thought they could use Leo. They thought that by fighting for custody, they could extort me for a multi-million-dollar settlement. They were profoundly mistaken. I sat calmly beside my legal team. I didn't need to say a single word. Mr. Hayes stepped up to the podium and methodically dismantled them. He presented the financial ruin. He presented the photos of Chloe's affairs. And then, he played the security footage I had quietly retrieved from their own smart home cameras. Footage of Chloe verbally abusing Leo, and David passively ignoring his own crying son. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, didn't even need to recess to make her decision. The evidence presented here today is abhorrent, the judge stated, glaring down at Chloe and David as if they were insects. Neither of you possesses the financial stability, nor the moral character, required to raise a child. You are both entirely unfit. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down, echoing through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Full legal and physical custody of the minor child, Leo, is hereby granted to his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Court is adjourned. David leaped up, his face desperate. Mom, please wait. Let me just hug him. Let me see my son. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. 2 massive Vanguard security contractors smoothly stepped into the aisle, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle between me and the man who used to be my son. I walked out of the courtroom, into the bright sunlight, and never looked back. 6 months passed. Karma is not always immediate, but it is always exact. On a rainy Tuesday evening, in a high-end restaurant downtown, a woman in a cheap, scratchy uniform was on her hands and knees. She scrubbed frantically at a wine stain on the marble floor. "Hey, you missed a spot," a wealthy patron sneered, intentionally dropping a crumpled napkin near her bucket. Chloe Sterling, former heiress, former socialite, bit her lip so hard it bled. She picked up the trash, her once manicured hands now rough, calloused, and smelling strongly of industrial bleach. She spent her days serving the very people she used to look down on, eating leftover scraps from the restaurant kitchen, because it was all she could afford on minimum wage. Poetic justice, it turned out, had a bitter taste. As for David, he lived in a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment over a noisy laundromat. The custom suits were gone, replaced by wrinkled shirts, and the permanent stench of cheap whiskey. Every night, he would sit on the edge of his unmade bed, staring at a framed photo of Leo and me. And every night he would dial my number, listening to the automated voice tell him that the number was no longer in service. He had chosen the illusion of wealth, and now, illusion was all he had left. Far away from the noise, the city smog, and the toxic rot of the Sterling family, the sun was setting over a sprawling historic estate in upstate New York. It was my real home. A place of actual warmth, lined with mahogany bookshelves, crackling fireplaces, and walls that echoed with genuine laughter. In the center of the massive living room, sitting on a priceless Persian rug, was Leo. He wasn't wearing a stiff, uncomfortable designer tuxedo. He was wearing soft, oversized pajamas, giggling happily as he galloped around the room. And in his hands, clutched tightly against his chest, was a small, hand-carved wooden horse. I sat in a plush armchair near the fire, a cup of hot chamomile tea in my hands. I watched my grandson play, feeling a profound, heavy peace settle over my soul. Money is a terrifying magnifier. It doesn't change who you are, it merely amplifies what is already inside of you. If you are a kind person, money gives you the power to heal. But if you are hollow, arrogant, and cruel, money will eventually hand you the rope to hang yourself. I took a slow sip of my tea, listening to the gentle crackle of the fire and the sweet sound of my grandson's laughter. My name is Eleanor Vance. They thought I was just a penniless old woman who didn't know her place. They thought they could banish me to the dark. They didn't realize that I was the one who owned the sun.